Welcome to the Disability at ICA Podcast, a space where we talk with researchers in the field of disability, communication, and media from all over the world to learn more about their work, how they got there, and the ways forward. In this first episode, we bring you a conversation between our hosts, Shakil Reja Efti and Beth Haller, co-director of the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment, and Professor Emerita at Towson University.
Thank you very much, Beth, once again for being on the podcast. It's an honor for us to have you on our episode, especially as someone who has started, working on critical disability studies and disability media. I personally find your work very insightful, especially one of my work that focuses on sonic representations of disability that I've published very recently. I found your text, the one that you published in 2023, very, very helpful. You are a scholar who have been working on critical disability studies and disability media from, I would say, early 90s, because I've seen your work like that dates back to early 90s. So, Beth, before we jump into our detailed conversation on disability media and how disability media scholars have come together for over the years, I'd like to request you to introduce yourself in your own words. How would you like to tell about yourself, Beth?
Okay. My name is Beth Haller. I have a PhD from Temple University in Mass Media and Communication from 1995. And I started working in this area. Well, I was a print journalist before I became an academic. And so I did several stories about the disability community and like a series on people with Down syndrome in the 80s and a series on post-polio syndrome. So I was not completely a novice, but I still didn't have, I don't think, disability awareness. So when I started in grad school in 1989 in my master's program, it was 1 year after the Deaf President Now movement in Washington, D.C. I was getting my master's at University of Maryland, College Park, which was a few miles from Gallaudet. And I think because of having been a journalist, I've been a journalist and I was getting this master's in science communication. So I wanted to do something that challenged me, and I decided I would do something where I needed an interpreter. And for some reason, Gallaudet popped into my brain, probably because I remembered the stories. And it all started from there. Like my master's thesis was about the deaf community and how they were covered before, during, and after the Deaf President Now movement. And then I went on to Temple University for my PhD, and my dissertation was on how the elite news media covered the Americans with Disabilities Act. But there weren't many people doing that kind of research back then. And I like to, as they say in academia, dig in the ground that no one else is digging.
Yeah.
But I love now, fast forward to 2025 and 2026, it's just awesome to have the Disability Committee for ICA, because I thought it was over, and now I see all these young scholars and people like you. So I'm really glad my work can help. I had a book, and I taught at Towson University in Maryland. And I was a journalism professor basically, but we started a disability studies minor, and I was on the committee designing that. And we put my media and disability course as one of the required courses, because from my perspective, everybody needs to know, if you're interacting with anybody that has a disability, especially if you're in a healthcare profession or a physical therapist or occupational therapist, whatever, you need to understand the media. And that's what I think is missing. So I've been trying to do more kind of in that area. And so our minor was actually in the College of Health Professions, and they usually took one extra class to kind of get awareness of how important media are, because I always learn from my students, and I learned from the health profession students that they have a very tough course of study, because they have to do like clinical rotations and things like that take them out into the field. And so it really built awareness in me about how much we need to be talking about the media to people who are rehab specialists, people who, teach special ed, whatever their connection, they need to know that when they're interacting with somebody with a disability, all this media stuff is on their shoulders, so somebody rolls up to them. So if they're of a certain age, they might think they're a war veteran, or if they have amputation,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're already throwing all these kinds of stereotypes, both negative and positive, into their brain. And most of those come from the media. So
Okay.
that's why I just kept on this path forever, because we're still not done. We need a lot of things to do. So
Yeah.
that's me. I retired in 2020
Okay.
on July 1. People were like, "Oh, did you know the pandemic was coming?" I was like, "No, but I thought it could." So after I retired, I decided to start funding a nonprofit that I had started with Patricia Almeida in
Mhm.
Brazil and Katia Malakoi in Australia. And it's called Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment.
Yup.
GDEEM is its short name.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started to focus on that. Right when I finished the 2023 book, I was like, this is great. I'm so glad I'm done. And I paid for it to be open access because I wanted people to be able to read it for free.
Thank you for doing this.
Especially for people coming from advocacy groups, not in the US, so they would have access to it. And it's now in an audiobook format too, which I think that makes it more accessible. And it's actually very inexpensive as an audiobook. It's like $20
Mm.
US.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I wanted to throw kind of my nonprofit out there to kind of do the work, because one thing I've learned is it's very hard to change the mass media. So what we're doing now with our project, several projects, we started a global disability news network.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've started, we're now in post-production for our documentary called Props No More, which is about disabled media creators kind of making a run around barriers to really change and influence the media. And then our third project by one of my teams at GDEEM has gone viral, and I highly recommend everybody go look at it. So GDEEM is, even though it has the word disability in the name, it's also trying to uplift marginalized people in the media. So the audio person for Props No More pitched me this documentary that he wanted to do. And I was like, this is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's now on YouTube. It's going to be a YouTube kind of documentary portrait series. And it's very happy and loving because it's trans couples talking about their love story and their family
Wonderful.
life and how they met and just like how they support each other. And probably a majority or more, almost 100% of the
Yeah.
couples have
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
kind of disability or neurodiverse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been phenomenal. And I knew this is what the world needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kai Tillman, the director, and Suri Ellerton and Austin Allstat are the
Wonderful.
team that brought
Mm-hmm.
it to fruition. So we launched it on Valentine's Day, and it's going to be new videos every week.
Wow.
And we've gotten major stars, and some of the couples are like major TV and film stars. Um,
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they lobbied us to be in the series. So it's just great to
Yeah.
put kind
So,
of positive stuff out there for the whole
uh-huh.
world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we decided when they pitched me the idea, they gave me three different kind of ways we could distribute it.
Mm-hmm.
But I really liked the YouTube way because that way people in other countries can
Can work.
access it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and we know people are struggling in lots of countries, especially if they're trans.
Mm-hmm.
And Kai's a trans director and neurodiverse. So, it's coming from the community. And that's the the perspective of our Global Disability News Network too. It's
Wonderful.
coming from the community. Karina Sturm, our deputy director, or news director, Amy Zohan, our deputy director, both have disabilities. And so we're trying to make it news from the disability perspective.
Wonderful.
And we're also sharing content with the Disabled Journalists Association, which is not, even though it's based in America, it's not just for Americans. And so, I mean, I think we need to be out there, especially with kind of traditional media being off kilter these days.
Yeah. One thing that I found very interesting, like when we started the conversation, I asked you to talk about yourself or tell us a bit about yourself. You started talking about I, and then you ended up as we. So that journey from I to we, that's fantastic, Beth.
Yeah,
And
I love
like,
it too.
yeah, and see, like you are very much involved in academia research. You are involved in media production, and also like the backbone of all of your work is activism, I would say. And you are trying to do something positive for people with disabilities. And your work, especially American representation of disability, is something that I find very much, helpful when I'm trying to work on, global South representation of disability. So getting the perspective from global North is very important. So what would you like to tell us about the American representation or the global North representation of disability? Is it any different from the global South, or did you get a chance to look into the representation of disability in the global South, Beth?
Yeah, I would point you to several different people. Ngozi Emmanuel has been doing research on disability representation in Nollywood in Nigeria, so should have her on the podcast. And then several people are doing research in South America, and Patricia Almeida being from Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
and being a former journalist like myself, she's started a lot of projects there. But I always like to tell the story of what Pat did that kind of blew the minds of South America.
Mm-hmm.
So she has a daughter with Down syndrome. And so when Amanda was born, she felt like she didn't know anything about, Down syndrome, and everything was very segregated. And so she became an activist back then. And Amanda's now 21. So she was talking to other mothers of kids with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them happened to be a writer on this popular telenovela in Brazil. And so her friend and fellow activist, they were able to get the telenovela to include a storyline about a baby being born with Down syndrome. So the storyline in the soap opera was a main character had these boy-girl twins, and when she found out the girl had Down syndrome, she said, I only want to take the boy home. And so, that's horrible, but I'm sure it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so then they had another like nurse character who said, that's awful, I'm going to adopt the girl. And so then they fast forwarded a few years. And so the writer on the telenovela's daughter ended up playing the now little girl who had
Wow.
Down syndrome. That was really
Nice.
important.
Yeah.
And so like I always say that what happened for us, especially with actors with Down syndrome, happened in 1989 when the TV show Life Goes On came on. And so Chris Burke, who played the Corky character, is an actor with Down syndrome and a musician. And so suddenly the doctors who were throwing wrenches into people's lives by trying to say, oh, we should just drive your kid to the institution now. You don't want this kid. And I mean, the medical establishment was telling parents to throw away their disabled children. But how can you do that when in popular culture,
Mm-hmm.
here's an actor with Down syndrome who is carrying this show, you know? And I think it's really interesting. I did a lot of looking into, and I met him once at the UN celebration, which is coming up on March 21st, World Down Syndrome Day, which Pat helped start. And I read the memoir that he wrote, and he says that when he, was asked to come to Hollywood to talk about projects, because he was just like a guest star on something, and they're like, build a show around him. And so he and his brother went there, and in the negotiations, originally they wanted to be all him, and he's like, look, I have an intellectual disability. I cannot memorize 42 pages of text. And they're like, okay, well, let's make it a family drama. And then they made it kind of about inclusive education. He was starting high school with his younger sister, who was like 4 years younger. So she was starting as a freshman. And so I think just having that, and no doctor can say anything negative that you will believe. Well, what about Chris Burke? He's starring in a major TV series. So I think there's just a lot of misinformation still out there.
Yep.
The things that people have been told even more recently when their child with the Down syndrome has been born.
Yep.
And so I think popular culture really needs all these voices, and they need authentic voices.
You have been in touch with critical disability studies scholars from around the globe. How did the journey start? Because you said, like, when you were working on your PhD dissertation, there were not many people who were interested in this field. I mean, how did you see the trend changing over the time, Beth?
Yeah, I think just reading every possible thing I could get my hands on. While I was in my master's program at the University of Maryland, I did a summer internship for grad students, and I was on the copy desk of the Baltimore Sun. And so I was looking at lots of things coming over the Associated Press wire service to like write headlines and, copy edit them and stuff. And one came across, and it was about the disability rag, which was a really important kind of publication in the US back before the internet. And so I was like, oh, I should subscribe to that. And so I started subscribing. It was like very low cost and low production. But back then, if you called yourself a magazine, you could get a discount through the US Postal Service to distribute those kinds of publications. So started subscribing, and it was very interesting. It was all perspectives about disability rights. And then I'm flipping to the back. It had a little tiny classified ad section, and I see this ad for Society for Disability Studies conference in Rockville, Maryland. And I'm like, oh, that's just a few miles away. So I decided I would go over there and feel like I met my people there. So it was just like in some little conference hotel, still very small. I think SDS started in like the mid 80s maybe. So I was pretty new to it since that was like 1990 when I first went. And but yeah, I met John Clogston, who is since deceased, but he was doing work on disability representation in the news. So I was like, okay, this is what, he kind of validated this as a path to be on. And then when he died in 1994, I think, or five, we were all devastated. He was a wheelchair user, but he also had type 1 diabetes. And so he had driven to get groceries to up his blood sugar. Probably not a good idea. But then I found out later that it wasn't the car crash that disabled him. It was a doctor doing an inappropriate thing when he was doing the surgery, where they didn't let blood and oxygen get to his spinal cord. So he was actually disabled because of medical malpractice, which I think has only gotten worse these days. But anyway, but he wasn't a bitter person. Anyway, he was working at a university in Illinois, and we met and became friends. And the Disability Rag has a publication house kind of part of it called Advocado Press, like advocate, but
Yep.
avocado.
Yeah.
So he published as like a kind of 8x11 pamphlet kind of thing. I think it was like maybe 25 pages or something about his dissertation research. It looked at representation in the news media and also interviewed journalists about what they thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like there was this body of work to build on. And so, it seemed more urgent once he died because I wanted to continue his work too. And then I kind of branched out into entertainment media and social media and online media because I started before the internet existed. So,
Yep.
but anyway, that I think making those connections with the disability community, they also used to be it was called the May Media Meeting. So disability activists, including the editor of the Disability Rag, convened a meeting. I think it was in Kentucky because she lived in Louisville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I would love to be there, but my semester is not over.
Mm-hmm.
But they started a listserv, and all of us who were part of the disability community that were interested in media were on that listserv for a long, long time because that was the only thing that kind of existed when email started. And so I got to know all these people, which was great. And I was younger than a lot of them too. So at least I got to find out their past work and stuff. A lot of them passed on. But anyway, and then when I decided that I wanted to write my first book, I'd published enough research at that point. And so I talked to Mary Johnson at the Disability Rag / Advocado Press. And she says, that sounds great. So what I did was take about, I don't know, 6 or 7 of my past papers and update them as chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And then added new chapters, one about blogging, because that was just coming in 2009 and stuff. And so the thing that has kind of driven me too is that both worlds don't know about each other still very well. So the disability community kind of, especially in America, they gave up on journalists a long time ago. And I say, like the journalist did not write that bad headline. Copy editor. And then in the journalism world, they also don't know about disability. But I think, and I've had this happen many times, if I talk to a journalist about a story about the disability community or the deaf community, they're like, that's a great story. And they go do it. But that filter of the editors who think disability is a downer, so they don't want it on the front page, or they don't see disability as the kind of really important issue that should be covered on every news beat. Always give the example of if the school district's opening a new elementary school, journalists need to know about the Americans with Disabilities Act so they can ask what accommodations have been made and what, all the accessibility components that are going to be there. There was a study done of the US public about 4 years after the ADA passed in 1990. Only 18% of Americans had even heard of the ADA. I doubt it's that much more now.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like 25% have heard of it. Maybe a few more. But anyway, that. And then when I was at that first SDS meeting, and then a few in those early days, I would present about media, and the people coming from the disability advocacy and other areas would be like, oh, that's great, but we have bigger things we have to do. We have to get people, in school and jobs and out of nursing homes.
Yep.
And my response was always, how do you think you're going to do that without public opinion being on your side? So
Definitely. Yeah.
I think they've kind of come around to my thinking.
Yeah.
And also there were hardly any people doing this research in mass communication or communication studies. And so that was a problem as well.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
were a
yeah.
handful of us. And then, I always talked about this. I was very glad to be at Towson University because there's a lot of universities, their tenure process is really snobbish. So they have certain journals that count for certain things. And if those journals are not taking your research about the disability community, because one time early on, I was created an article out of some of my dissertation findings. And the feedback I got from this journalism and mass communication journal was, she seems to be an activist. She's advocating for this or that. I'm like, the law has passed. Everyone's supposed
Yep.
to be doing this, so just
Yeah.
kind of the ignorance in academia too,
Yep.
but I feel like we've gotten around that now. And, my 2010 book, I purposefully wrote it in a style that was more kind of journalistic, so
Mm-hmm.
anybody wouldn't have to dig through academic words or whatever. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought I was going to get slapped by academic world, but no, everybody loved it. People started using it in their intro to disability studies classes, that because the students, like kids 17 to 22 in college in America, you know, they were into popular culture. They're part of the popular media world. So when they're learning about disability studies, obviously they have questions about the media, but the sociology professor or the whatever professor
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
doesn't know about the media. So found out that several different universities started using my 2010 book as just a book for their classes. And some people still use that old book. It's
I mean, even though it's old, it's great. I've also read it and I've used it for my research as well, Beth.
Are you interested in the topic of disability, communication, and media? Join us for our third pre-conference at ICA 2026, Invisible to Indivisible. We'll be hosting a hybrid space, both in person in Cape Town and virtually on Zoom, on June 4th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. South African Standard Time. This year's schedule includes presentations from early career researchers to keep you up to date with emerging topics in our field, a keynote address focusing on challenges in the African region, and 2 small group sessions led by senior scholars about making connections in academia and beyond for scholars with a purpose. You can check our website, icadisability.com, for more information. See you around!
Since you were mentioning about Clockstone and and the sort of networks that you found your people through, definitely those networks helped you reach other critical disability studies scholars, but at the same time, you yourself made your students interested in this field, I'm sure, over the years. So personally, for me, I became disabled 5 years ago after a spinal cord injury, and since I was already studying in mass communication, I found that particular aspect, disability media, very much intriguing. And since you said how media is representing disability, it's directly affecting my life as a person with disability. So that's why it's very important to see the representation. So my personal story to begin my journey as a researcher into disability media was my personal experience with disability. How about your students, those who over the years became interested in disability media studies? How did you make them interested, or what was that trend like, Beth?
Yeah, I think we started the disability studies minor at Towson, I think in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 2015. I don't remember which
Uh-huh.
year. Anyway, and so since we put it in the College of Health Professions, I got some pushback from people in the disability studies world. Oh no, those are medical model people. I'm like, yeah, that's who you need to teach about the social model. People think
Yep.
the medical model is the only way.
Yeah.
So we cross-listed it so mass media students could take it as an elective, and the
Mm-hmm.
health professions that were doing the disability studies minor. Well, anybody could do the disability studies minor, but it was mostly health profession students because it fit with
Mm-hmm.
their majors.
Uh-huh.
And so the mass media students got it right away because in Baltimore, which is a very diverse community. They already understood that people weren't represented properly, maybe because of race, LGBTQ status, gender. And then when I add on disability, they're like, oh, of course. So the mass media students were like, have been told about this for a long, long time. They knew the power of media. And then a lot of the health profession students were not movie watchers or TV watchers because they were so busy with their coursework. But here's what I would tell them. And they usually got it, like I said, the second class. But I would say, look, the people you're working with are affected. Like, you might work with them 6 hours a week. The rest of the week, they're subjected to what people think their life is like because of the media. And so, or because their own biases too, but a lot of those biases are reinforced by the media. And they're like, oh, never thought about it like that. And I don't know that I got them to go watch more stuff, but they had to watch things in the class. And like some of them had never heard of the Paralympics. I mean, since the Paralympics are going on right now, I mean, if you're a rehab counselor or a occupational therapist, I mean, watch any movie about, like, what was the one about Murder Ball? Watch Murder Ball, and you'll see almost all those guys learned that wheelchair rugby existed because somebody came and did a demo when they were at a rehab hospital. And I don't know anything about sports, but sports is a way in for a lot of people. And so when I had this student tell me, yeah, because I ended up adding a whole unit about the Paralympics and the media coverage, because there was a researcher who did her master's thesis on the Paralympics when they were in Utah a long time ago. And what she found was the Americans went home, all the American journalists went home after the Olympics, and they did not come back for the Paralympics. So we have a really bad history of not covering it, but she found all the other countries, their journalists came back. So there's kind of an American anomaly where they don't care just because of the way our system is set up. But other countries, I mean, I think that's helped media representation too. When everybody in Croatia or wherever shows up, when the sitting volleyball team comes back with their gold medal or whatever. So, and I know African Paralympians have talked about how, they come back to their country with gold, but they can't get into the building, the government buildings. So, they make awareness just out of that. And then, so this one student said, yeah, I ended up watching 9 hours of the Paralympics, and she'd never heard of it before. And so I think that's important. And also that students recognize the difference between kind of disabled mimicry, Dom Evans' term, which is not having a person with that disability play a character with that disability, because it's very much more nuanced in entertainment, TV, or film. You could just see how it's not nuanced when somebody else is there. And there's a great article in Disability Studies Quarterly about, the Kevin Hale character Artie and Glee, and how awkward he looked in his wheelchair because he's not a wheelchair user.
Yep.
So, I think they're starting to become aware. And then what's great about the younger generation is they get angry because, representation has become part of kind of cultural awareness in the US. And so, they know that, the horrible, prejudiced, racist history of blackface and yellowface and all kinds of horrible representations of ethnic groups and women. And so it's easy for them to integrate in that, like, that's awful. But one of my favorite experiences out of the classes was teaching about access too. So I
Mm-hmm.
also had them all learn how to do an audio description script. They didn't have to do the actual audio description,
Yep.
but they had to do the written script. Some of them did the audio description audio, but anyway, and I also noticed the first time I was teaching with that assignment that some of the students that were struggling with the academic side of the papers they had to write, just like A+, like watch a movie and write an audio script. That sounds awesome. And so suddenly, I'm also finding students that need that kind of hands-on. So I had this student, I think she was going into a health profession, maybe nursing or something.
Mm-hmm.
So she emailed me either after the class or wrote about this in her final paper. So her grandmother had become blind. And so Netflix exists at this time. And I don't know if you know the story of the blindness community here getting Netflix to audio describe all their original programming within 3 weeks of the show Daredevil premiering. And because
Hey.
their attitude was, this is a blind superhero and we can't access this. So Netflix promised that all their original programming would have audio description, which it does. So she knew about that from my class. She goes to her grandmother and says, and I can't remember what caused her grandmother's blindness, but she wasn't blind her whole life. It was
Mm-hmm.
probably an age-related blindness condition. Anyway, she said, Grandma, we're going to watch something with audio description on Netflix. Let's pick something that both you and I want to watch. And then they sat there and watched it. And she showed me by just that story, she was like furious that they weren't talking about audio description in every one of her disability studies classes. And, like, and I was like, what kind of rehab? Did they just write your grandmother off? And the doctor said, okay, you're blind now. Bye. Like this material should be in every medical professional's hands
Mm-hmm.
so that, I mean, I'm sure, very traumatizing to be diagnosed with a sensory disability or wheelchair disability, paraplegia or quadriplegia, something that it just happens. One day you're not disabled and one day you are. I gradually moved into all my disabilities, or they just now have words for my disabilities. Anyway, I'm just like, we've got to do something because this is also not an area just for us mass media scholars. We need to be getting it into the world. Even like employment counselors, everybody needs to understand how to make something accessible. If you're trying to get a disabled person a job, through our system here in the US, it might help if you knew the accessibility needs and that if they get the job, they have to comply with their accessibility needs, you know?
Definitely so. Definitely so.
So I
Yep.
think
Yep. Yep.
that
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
just kind of all the pieces start
Mm-hmm.
coming together. And I love it when people know nothing about disability media or whatever, because they need to, it's not just about like, in the olden days of academia, we were the outliers, oh, ha, 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 you watch media for your academic area, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
We were always seen as the ugly stepchildren or whatever. And I think even people in all academic disciplines now know how much the media, crafts everything, especially since we just went through a global pandemic and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
everybody was relying on media.
Yeah, 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 definitely, Beth. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your insights on these. And would you like to say something about ICA, Disability Working Group, and how did you get involved with this network from the beginning and the development of it?
The ICA was supposed to be in Brisbane in
Mm-hmm.
2020,
Yeah.
and May of 2020, I was like, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going. Did a Fulbright. First, I did a sabbatical one semester, I think the spring semester of 2005.
Yep.
And so then I went over to Australia and I met Jared Goggin at University of Sydney, where he was then. And then I don't think I flew to Perth that year. I went up to Brisbane and went to
Mm-hmm.
the Great Barrier Reef. Just met disability studies people. Once I knew Jared, he just introduced me to people in Brisbane who were doing disability studies. So even though I was there really to go to the Great Barrier Reef, these nice people took me all around
Wow.
and told me about, we had dinner and stuff. So everywhere I go, I just like, if I don't know somebody, I'll just email them and say, hi, I'm in the country. Hey, want to get together? I just got back
Wow.
from Germany, Iceland, and Finland, and I met with disability studies and disabled artists in all places. So it was
Wow.
great. Just like power of email. I think because I was a journalist,
Yep.
like I just had to cold call people,
Yeah.
nothing like that scares me. Anyway, so Jared kind of got me connected to a lot of the people in Australia. And
Yeah.
then I think he introduced me to Katie Ellis at Curtin University. And so I think the three of us were kind of strategizing about what we wanted to do when it was going to be in Brisbane in 2020, not knowing. And, I still remember sending emails to, or the Gold Coast. It wasn't really Brisbane, it was Gold Coast. Sending emails to people in that area who I knew were doing disability and media stuff and saying, I'm going to be there. It doesn't matter what's going on in China. Not knowing. So anyway, um, and then we found out that that was not going to be happening.
Yep.
But, I felt like a lot of us, and Alice Wong has written a lot about this, disabled people could tell the world how to do this, but no one would listen to them. A friend and I did a paper about that. We did an analysis of all these disabled writers' content in those first 6 months of the pandemic.
Wow.
And it was amazing, because they were telling us of their experience. They've been living like it was a pandemic because they couldn't go out or they didn't have access out. Or like one of my friends who has two adult twins on the autism spectrum, she's like, yeah, it's everybody's just living our life,
Yeah.
having everything brought to the house,
Yep.
She would like to go out, but she doesn't like to leave them alone. So, and she hadn't gotten respite care
Yeah.
yet. So anyway, I think connecting with Jared, I knew people in the UK. Where else? I've gone to a couple of conferences and met people in Ireland and England, and I know a ton of disability studies folks in Canada. I think
Hmm.
Canada actually has the very first, like in the 70s, they had disability studies. I forget which university, but anyway, but a lot of the early disability studies were in like rehab or sociology. It wasn't in any media stuff.
Yep.
So, also the I forget when Victor got in touch with me, but he'd done a postdoc, I think, with Jared at the University of Sydney. And then when he was doing his postdoc at Princeton, he emailed me and said, hey, can we have a Zoom meeting? I'm in New Jersey right now, for this
Hmm.
postdoc. And so I give a lot of credit to Victor because I thought it was just a bunch of old people like me. Not that Katie and Jared are younger than me, but like I was not thinking that this was going to happen. But Victor really has got it going. And then finding out when I went to the in-person in Toronto, it was that 2023.
Hmm.
Um, and I met lots of people in person. And I met Val, who's from
Yep.
Peru. Is she from Peru or from Chile? She teaches
Yeah,
in
from Chile.
Chile. Or she's from
Yeah.
Peru. I forget which one.
Yeah.
Anyway, hi Val. And when she told me, well, she like sent me a message on the conference like app, and I said, sure, we can meet. And then when we met, I think she posted on Twitter that I said yes to meeting her. So it was like, wait, am I the Beyonce of disability media?
Yep, you are.
And I say Beyonce because she's a fellow Texan like me. Anyway, so, and she told me that she had read my 2010 book. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, I didn't know people in other countries were reading it. I mean, I was very happy that people
Yep.
in English-speaking countries were reading it, so I didn't
Yeah.
really even think about it being elsewhere. And I think that's helped too. A lot more scholars are becoming fluent in English because it's even more of an international language. Not that I'm saying people all have to speak English. Anyway, just a lot of people speak English, and a lot of people get their kids to speak English. And
Good for them.
so right. So I've been meeting all these grad students. I was on Nghazi's
Yep.
dissertation committee. I'm at Bingbo at Denver. So, all these young scholars, I'm just so psyched that they're interested in this area. And then once they get jobs, they're also going to be interacting with people in their department that know nothing about disability. And, joining together, doing research with people too. And so I think that's what I love to do is like find someone also interested and let's co-author stuff, because
Wonderful.
again, being at Towson, I was not in this snobbish, kind of very rigid tenure system where you have to be first author, you have to be solo author, you have to be only in these, because I was in that for 2 years and I was like, that's never going to happen because with those really rigid, I think disability studies got hurt because it wasn't understood. And so it was just pushed off as, no, you have to, a lot of people dropped their disability research
Hmm.
because the university thought it wasn't real research. So, and there's just
Yep, yep, yep,
bias in
yep.
there. And I can't get people to understand that their brains come to disability with all kinds of stigma and
Definitely.
also there's an uncomfortableness, I
Yeah, yeah,
think,
yeah.
in about their own human body, where I always
Mm,
say, people ask me, how do we get journalists to, you know, write better stories or whatever? I said, the difficulty is you have to like reach into somebody's brain and show them
mm,
that they could cope if
yep.
they had a disability. Yeah, have you seen the documentary When Billy Broke His Head? I showed that every semester to all my
Okay.
students.
Note taken.
It's from the 1990s, but it's
Hmm.
really important documentary because Billy Golfus was a DJ in Minneapolis and he was in a motorcycle accident and got a traumatic brain injury
Hmm.
and had I think weakness. He could walk, but he had some weakness on his right side. And um, so he just got a grant and then just took a camera person with him to everything as he was becoming educated. Basically looked at this as, okay, I'm now disabled. What do I need to know? So he interviewed a lot of the major disability rights activists, disability studies scholars. It's also a really important historical document because people that have now passed on are in there talking about everything, including like Ed Roberts and Paul Longmore. Um,
Hmm.
and so that kind of story that the students watched, they would be like furious by the end of it, like, what? And occasionally, like in America, there's a really big area of siblings of people with disabilities becoming disability studies scholars or taking disability classes because to them, if they've grown up with, their sibling with a disability, it's
Yep.
no big deal to them. Like this is their brother, this is their sister, this is not something else, that their comfort level is very high if their
Yep.
parents raised them right.
Hmm.
And so, like then the siblings would like pop out with, oh, no, it's not $500 a month, it's only $700 a month. I think it's now $1,200 a month that you get if you're on disability, Social
Yep.
Security disability in the US, which of course
Uh-huh.
no one can live on that. You have to have Section 8 housing, otherwise you're
Uh-huh.
spending all that $1,200 on rent. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I think they
Still better than
saw,
Bangladesh.
yeah, those kinds of content showed them the path of somebody becoming disabled in America. And it
Hmm.
holds up really well. It's from like 1996 or something.
Yep.
And like I would show it today. And the only thing that's different, sadly, is the amount that people get paid per month. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they get really weirded out about one scene where he's interviewing a disability rights activist, and I think he's also a songwriter. And so he's a quadriplegic, and his attendant is like he's interviewing while his attendant is getting him ready to. He already has
Mm-hmm.
his shorts on or whatever, his pants on, but
Uh-huh.
just getting him ready to put him in his wheelchair and stuff. And they were like, they're being too rough on him. Like the attendant, he was not, it wasn't changing his voice. So I tried to teach them, like he's paralyzed from the neck down. So you look at it as he's being too rough. Do you hear any difference in his voice? If he was being hurt, his voice would have changed if he was talking to Billy Golfus. And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, they just,
Mm,
also that kind of pity thing is always in people's head, even when they get it.
yep.
So that's another plus is that when
Mm-hmm.
we get that pity out of their head, then they're like so upset about people being treated badly.
Yep,
Um,
yep, yep, yep.
so anyway,
Mm-hmm.
another thing that I showed that is really rough for them to watch, but I think it's important, is The Boys in the Bunkhouse, the short documentary from the New York Times. It's now a book, um, but it's like 18 minutes of hell. I think that's how long it is. It's really short.
Okay.
And they've taken these men with intellectual disabilities
Mm-hmm.
and basically made them slaves to a turkey processing plant in Iowa. They moved them from Texas to Iowa, did not tell their families where they were, put them in this old falling down schoolhouse. This one you can actually watch.
Okay.
Still, it's on YouTube. Um, and the students are just like, what is happening? And there's this one scene
Yeah.
where there's a really small town. It's very rural where these men are kept, and they're being more disabled by like killing these turkeys in this processing plant is very hard work and very um dangerous. These turkeys are
Yeah.
big because we breed them and give them hormones and stuff. These are not like no baby turkeys. And they're being multiply disabled.
Uh-huh.
And like, why is no one in the town worried? They got to go to the grocery store and they were being stolen from. So this turkey processing plant and this disability organization in Texas were taking all their Social Security benefits and giving them, I think, $20 a week or something, or maybe 60 for the month. And so, oh, you get to go get your sodas and candy on the weekend. Of course, you only have money for that. And they would go to this church and really enjoy
Yeah.
going to the church on Sunday, the one day they didn't work.
Yeah.
And it's just horrifying.
Wow.
And when this mayor of this little town is talking about, oh, they're good guys, we didn't know what was going on. I was like, Holocaust,
Mm.
anyone? I mean, it's just like I went to one of the extermination sites
Yep.
in Germany a long, long time ago in the 80s, and horrifying. And to see like a community right next to the fence.
Yep.
And that's what was happening here. This community were like, oh, I'm sure a lot of them worked at the processing plant and saw their mistreatment,
Yeah.
and like it was horrible. So
Yeah.
finally, somehow a social worker said, this isn't bad, and went and got the okay to
Mm-hmm.
basically take them to a nice hotel and start getting them what they deserved, which was
Uh-huh.
independent living and helping them get the services they needed for their now disabilities, because they become more disabled. They had intellectual disability when they went there, and now they have physical disabilities because things that had happened to them doing
Mm-hmm.
this horrifying job.
Yeah.
Um, and so, as much as I don't want to traumatize students, sometimes you have to look at the bad things. And like when this happened, I don't know what year, when the New York Times wrote about it, But 4 years later, they found exactly the same thing being done at a chicken processing plant in North
Uh,
Carolina. So,
wow.
this stuff is still happening. People want to push it to the past. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, there's a
Yep. Yep.
lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
rural
Yeah.
areas of America where
Or
people really
elsewhere in the
right.
world, maybe. Some of the challenges that you mentioned while,
Right.
doing your disability media research, uh, like the challenges that you were facing a few years ago, maybe the same challenges we are facing now in the global south, in Bangladesh, for example, where I'm based in now, or in Turkey, where I studied, and I've recently moved to
Right.
Bangladesh. So it's quite challenging to make people understand the importance of it. But I'm glad that I'm working on it, and thanks to
Yeah.
you, Beth, for showing the light to to young researchers like us, those who are trying to excel in this field. Thank you very
You
much.
guys teach me, but you guys teach me as much as I give you my stuff, because I think that's really important too. Like if
Yeah.
somebody's closed off and doesn't want to learn anything else, they should retire. Get out of this business. You need to be a lifelong learner, especially
Definitely.
in the disability world, because disabilities change as your life goes on. And like the
Hmm.
people that have it in their brain that they would be better off dead, I'm like, you're more resilient than you think you are. Like, why do you think that, you know, this is death time? You know? Um, so yeah, I think that, and just learning from people with different countries' backgrounds too, I think is really important. And that's why I wanted to make the Global Disability News Network, so that we would have voices from all over the world. Our two news director and deputy news director in Germany right now. Um, but we have contributors from all over the world.
Don't miss the Working Group on Disability, Communication and Media's event at ICA 2026 main conference. These are scheduled in South African time, which is GMT plus 2 hours. On Friday, June 5th, we'll have panels about visual culture and inequality in the African context, from 12 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. On Saturday, June 6th, starting at 10:30 a.m., we'll have a blue sky session about the future of disability communication and media research at ICA, and then a panel on health communication. Finally, on Sunday, June 7th, we'll be closing with a session on inequalities in the mediated disability activism at 1:30 p.m. Most of our sessions are hybrid, so you can join from wherever in the world you are. Just make sure you register to participate in the main conference at icahdq.org/event/ICA26.
We almost to an end of our today's episode,
Okay.
Beth, and we are so grateful to you for your time. We would
Right.
like to end our episode with your suggestion to early career researchers who are trying to be in this field, disability media. What three suggestions would you have for them, those who are trying to excel in this area, Beth?
Yeah, I think, well, first let me put in a thank you to my parents, because we didn't know any of this was going to happen. My dad ended up dying in 2017, my mom in 2019. My dad was a genius. He was an aerospace engineer and designed fighter jets and all kinds of stuff. He also could teach himself anything. So he taught himself investing because my mother had Parkinson's, and he knew that her health care was going to be expensive. So he wanted to have a cushion of money that, if he went first, which he didn't think he was going to do, but he did, that I would have the money to take care of her. And none of us knew that she was going to die 2 years after him. And so I have this little cache of money, and I'm like, I don't need this. I was still working. And so I said, I'm going to plow it into Gadim, because, you know, so many people have tried to do so many kinds of projects, but they haven't been able to get funding. So I think my idea is, let's create these projects, then hopefully we'll have something to show funders, and we can use other money besides, because my parents' money is running out. But I think that it just needs to happen, because I've been involved with so many things trying to get them started. well, we actually have these things started and people are responding in very positive ways and say they're needed. So now we're going to start asking the world to help support what we've created too.
Wonderful.
Anyway, so 3 things, if you're a grad student or wanting to, an early disability study scholar. First, you've got to be a good PR person for your research. Be able to pitch if your university or if, your tenure committee doesn't see the importance of what you're doing. You may have to do your own little document about why this is important, that there's 1.3 billion disabled people, because everybody you're interacting with that isn't aware of disability studies here's the word disability, like, but you're not a medical scholar, like they can't
Yeah.
get the medicine out of disability.
Yep.
So I think you have to be your own best kind of cheerleader
Wonderful.
and there's tons and tons of data about why this is needed. I think it's probably more needed than anything else, especially as we're seeing so many people with post-COVID syndrome and other like invisible disabilities are the biggest category in America. And so, and I think people don't want people to identify as disabled. So you have to fight against that in your cheerleading. Like if somebody's using a wheelchair, they'll accept it. But if somebody says, oh, well, I have chronic fatigue syndrome, well, that's not a disability. Like they'll try to start arguing with you that that's not a disability, or
Yep.
someone's neurodiverse. Well, but you don't have autism, right? Like I'm neurodiverse and I have sensory sensitivity stuff. Yeah, I don't have autism, but the sensory stuff, which I've only found out about in like the last 15, 20 years, it still affects me, just
Yep.
because you're saying that doesn't make it go away, and I don't want it to go away. It's why I'm the way I am.
Yep.
And I don't know if you read my introductory chapter for the open access book of 2023.
Yep. I
So
did.
that I kind of explain what I think it's a disability gain. And I think that is that's my number 2. Learn about disability gain and deafness gain, because people see it as such a deficit when almost everybody I know, once they've coped with what has happened to them disability wise,
Mm-hmm.
they say their life, yeah, it's different, but it's not worse usually, especially if you're in the global north. Global south, I think that's another issue to deal with, that it is such a horrific, I don't know how to phrase it, but people sometimes disable orphans in some countries so they will get more money as beggars,
Yep.
so
Yep. They would pretend sometimes as well. Yep.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But really having that arm missing helps for getting even more money.
The money
Like, the
is
world,
the money is not
yeah,
worth it though. It's very little, so of no
I know,
use.
but these are people that have control over them, and I
Yeah.
think that's something that people need to be aware of, is that you know a lot of disabled people are kind of under the thumb of people that do not have their rights in their mind. They just want to see what they can make from them, and it happens in the global north too. People stealing from disabled people manipulating what is happening with them so they can make money, people stealing from nonprofits and stuff like that.
Yep.
So but anyway, the disability gain piece I think is really important, because that is what non-disabled people do not get.
Mm.
Like if you read that first chapter from me, because it was really, I call it my autobiographical essay, because having to write it down helped me so much, because I was like, oh, really, because I think I became a journalist because of this neurodiversity, because I needed to be in control of my space, and what I was doing. And so journalists sit, yes, in an open air newsroom that is not that quiet, but people have to be quiet because, everybody's talking on the phone. So they have to talk pretty softly. And then if I go interview them in person, I take my own car, so I'm in charge of my day. And I think that came because for sound and all kinds of other bodily reasons, I needed to be in charge of my day. And also I love learning stuff too, and so, and I'll think going into disability studies helped me learn more about myself,
Wonderful.
learn about like my mom's best friend from childhood was a polio survivor. So every time I looked at my parents' wedding pictures, there was a person with disability there in her bridesmaids group, so that was no big deal. My mom was a registered nurse, but her focus was kind of the way she looked at the world was, what can we do that makes life better for other people?
Wonderful.
And so, she wants people to have equal access to everything, so she's for racial equality, gender equality, disability equality. We didn't use those terms back then, but, and I interviewed her and one of their mutual friends for an article I never wrote.
Okay.
But, my mom would talk about how she grew up in a small town in East Texas, but they went when my grandfather and her friend and she went to a play or something in Texarkana, Texas. And she remembered how people stared at her friend on the sidewalk, And then I think they did some kind of class trip to Atlantic City or something. And she said all the girls in their group, in their class, circled her so no one could see her as they walked down the sidewalk, her friends, because the non-disabled friends could not take people looking at their friend that way. They noticed it too. And because her friend, Shirley Sue Smith, grew up in the same small town as her, it was so small that everybody knew everybody else. So, and she became disabled when she was like 2, even though she was actually born with some disabilities. She was Shirley Sue Smith, not disabled classmate number 5 or whatever, so everything was from the beginning, access, participation, like no one would think of excluding her because she was part of the town and part of the class. So that, I think, disability gain is really important, and what I've learned about myself, and also be self-reflective too, why are you reacting certain ways, or, because I think people don't do enough self-reflection on what they're doing. And I still remember interviewing somebody with a traumatic brain injury when I was a journalist in the 1980s. And I don't remember how I badly phrased my question to him about something like, well, at least you're alive. He's like, yeah, but I have no memories of my child's birthday parties, when she was born. I was like, okay, glad to learn from you that was not the right way to phrase that question. Yeah, you're alive, but you still have traumatic brain injury, which, you have to figure out ways to recreate things that you now cannot remember. Or, also people are very, I don't know why people are so combative to other humans. Anyway, so let me see. What's the third thing? Just write. Don't let anybody tell you to just stay on the path. If this is what you want to do research on, do research on it. And what I found is that it's actually helpful. So I was putting my research into all kinds of journals that had nothing to do with disability, Journal of Popular Culture and Film, Journal of whatever, media literacy. My colleague and I got a paper in there. I sent you his podcasting book. So, just look at a call for papers and see if you can challenge yourself to find the disability topic in that
Yeah.
call for papers, if it's in your area. But I'm computer science people. They need to be doing research on this. Medical students, they need to be doing research on this.
Yeah.
Rehab students, everybody, sociology, psychology, American studies, everybody can find the disability research needs in their field. So find them and do that.
This was the first episode of the Disability at ICA podcast, brought to you by the Working Group on Disability, Communication and Media at ICA. You can find all the episodes of this show on our website, icadisability.com. My name is Valquiria Ramos Obregón, and I've been an assistant producer for this episode, alongside Hwee, Jace. Production, conduction, and edition was in charge of Shakil Reja Efti. The background music was downloaded from YouTube Studio and created by the Mini Vandals. We hope to see you in our in-person or virtual events. Have a nice day!